The first settler in the woods is generally a man who's outlived his credit or fortune in the civilized parts of the state. His time for migrating is in the month of April. His first object is to build a small cabin of rough logs for himself and his family. The floor of this cabin is of earth. The roof is of split logs. The light is received through the door, and in some instances through a small window made of greased paper. A coarser building adjoining this cabin affords shelter to a cow and a pair of good horses. The labor of erecting these buildings is succeeded by the killing of the trees on a few acres of the ground near the cabin. This is done by cutting a circle around the trees 2 or 3 feet from the ground. This is day 1 of building the Townsends homestead. We're working on this very primitive cabin, this first structure on the site, and the very first thing we're going to do is work on the foundation. Some of these cabins, most of these cabins, probably had no foundation whatsoever other than the sill log that's sitting right on the ground. We're going to put down some stones because we want this cabin to stay around just a little while.
That's right on it.
Okay.
Outside is 14.
Okay, so that looks good right there. We're setting our foundation stones out to our outer diameters on our cabin, and we're choosing a size that's the same as Washington's cabins, which is actually a very common size, about 14 by 16, probably on the outside edges. The inside of this will probably be more like 13 by 15 on the inside. We've got our stones set, and now it's time for the sill logs. These are the base logs here on the front and back of the building, and we've picked out a species. Most of the trees out here are tulip, but I wanted to pick something that'd be a little more sturdy for sort of ground contact here. So this side there's a locust log, and the problem is that they're super heavy and they're super hard to chop. I can see why you wouldn't want to make a whole cabin out of these. We are learning a lot already. Just, you know, we've had a lot of starts and stops just getting these logs into position because they're so heavy.
2, 3, go. Nope. Kyle almost had it up on top.
Okay, so we 2, 3, up.
One, 2, 3, up.
Whoa. Is it up there?
Almost. Just about.
We've been working on this a couple days, just getting the base down and learning about how to get these notches kind of right. And it's been, there's been a lot of kind of back and forth about exactly how we should get these notches done. We're doing a V notch, which is based on what we saw at the lower Swedish cabin. It's a very simple notching system, kind of similar to the straight saddle notches, except you're trimming both sides of the log kind of a V shape on one side and then the inverted V shape on the other side. We've learned a lot about just how to get started with that. We tried some notches, even sawing that V in, but it's I think really going to be one of those just sort of, you got to feel your way to get that notch, and those first few that you do aren't very good, but that's just how it works. So our bottom logs are sill logs in this case, and they're pretty big. Moving these sill logs into position, especially when they were this big, you definitely can't do it with just 1 or 2 persons. You really need to have a good 4, 5, 6 man crew to get some of these bigger logs in. And it's quite likely that if you were just doing 1 or 2 people on this, you'd definitely stick to smaller size logs.
Did you guys finish cornbread or is it bacon right now?
So now that we've done our foundation, we can move on to smaller logs, and these ones have already been prepped and stripped, and really I've done these almost a season beforehand. That's something that would have been done as you find your place to build your house. You would come in and start cutting down logs ahead of time. That's what we did here, and these hopefully dried out. They're a little bit smaller, should be a lot easier to handle. We can move a little faster.
Where we want that log to
So we're here at this is the back side of the cabin where the fireplace is going to be. And we're gonna have to cut out the opening for the fireplace. And so we've measured this top log, and this is the first log that's going to get cut. The log over the top will actually be sort of the lintel log or the mantle log that is at the top of the fireplace opening. But since these logs come down and they get really close to each other, hopefully almost touching, we're gonna have to actually kind of get the opening notch here so that once this log wall has been built up, we can get in there with a saw blade and cut down and get through these logs. But if we don't cut this ahead of time, it'll be very difficult to get in there. We're gonna do this same idea when we get to the window opening, or at least the first log that's gonna get cut out of the window opening, and for the door here on this side, but they're gonna be a little higher up. This is day 5 we've been working on this. We've had, some people in and out, but pretty much working all day, 5 days. We've learned a lot, and we're moving a little bit faster and much more precise as we've been working on this structure. It's always kind of like that, a learning process.
Ooh, that's pretty. That's real pretty.
Yeah.
Ready? One, two, three. That wasn't too bad. Look at that. Look at that. That's pretty.
How's it? Does it go one way or the other? Sheesh. Did it get any better?
I don't think so.
Is
We
it-
closed our gap quite a bit over here. I think we're looking pretty
Need to go
good.
deeper on that. Instead of,
Where is it? Is it still touching this outside edge?
yeah.
So if we take your side down at least an inch, right?
Yeah, and then we got to rock it this way some. So
Yeah. So rock
the
this
notch
way
that's
and
on the
that
outside,
Yeah.
and then you thinking that will help fix your side a little bit
Yeah.
too?
Looks about right. Good. Looking good.
Great, Kyle.
Okay. You're good. It's stable. Just hold it. What I want to do now. How far along are you guys with your notch?
We're ready to test.
Okay.
Beautiful.
It's been, I don't know, we've been working on this guy about 8 or 9 days, and obviously we're doing pretty well. This is the last round of logs for the main body of the cabin. As soon as we get the last couple logs on here, we're going to start working on the roof structure. And this process has been, well, obviously we're behind schedule. It's taken a lot more time to sort of get up to speed, and as we've gone up the structure here, we've worked a lot harder on getting the notches sort of tighter. The bottom structure, we were really just learning about how the notching was going, and when I first started looking at the cabins that were existing from the time period, I thought, oh, you know, those notches are pretty sloppy. But now looking back on it and looking at our notches, they did an amazing job. And if you've seen the ones that are hewn houses, they are works of art. I can't imagine trying to get a notch that good. It will take me several structures before I get anywhere close to being able to make a notch as good as those period notches. But it's been, even though it's, you know, taken a lot longer maybe than we expected, I think we're learning so much about how these structures go together, how long it would take, how much man hours that a structure like this would take. Even though it's a simple, at least in the time period, quick structure, still very labor intensive. A lot of materials have to be used on this, and a lot of time we have more tools than they had. We've got more time than they have, and still it's hard for us to do it as fast as they talked about being able to make one of these structures. So I am really enjoying this process, but
I wish it would go faster. But nonetheless, this has been such a satisfying project. Every log that goes up, you can start to see it building, and it gets more and more exciting as we go. I can't wait to get to this roof section. That is going to be very challenging. I'm really not quite sure how it's going to go together yet, but I'm so excited to, really see this thing start to take shape. So in our last episode, we were working on the walls, and the walls, getting done with that is a great feeling. The walls took a lot of work, a lot of sort of strength and energy to get them done, a lot of logs to work with, and a real learning process. But in reality, it's probably the easiest part of the structure. Now comes this tricky part. We're going to start working on the roof structure. Now, the roof structure really isn't that much more complicated, because what we're going to be doing here is basically an extension of how the walls worked. We're not going to be doing rafters per se, but log purlins, which really, it's very, very similar to how the walls went up, except we're going to have to play around with the angles and how we cut the notches. It gets a lot more precise. Some of the cabins that we see in the 18th and 19th century were made in this fashion where it's an extension of the walls, except they taper very rapidly as we go up. This notch kind of looks exactly like what we've been doing. The problem here is that we have to sink this notch down into this purlin log a little bit, or else the log that goes over the top of it, since the roof surface is right here, there would be very, very little of this upper log to hold that in place, and to hold this purlin log in place, to kind of lock it in. So we have to shrink there, or sink this notch down a little bit into this log to leave more structural material of this log that sets down, so that it has enough strength to hold this purlin into position. So we have to make this notch even more complicated than it originally looks like. Well, I'm real happy with our first couple of gable end logs. We've got those up into position. They're looking good. I put in a actual little impromptu plumb bob here on our peak log, so that as we put our strings down, we can get a really good gauge about where these purlin logs are going in. And we've got our first purlin set in position, and it's heavy. I was concerned about the logs bending a little bit as they dried, so I used oak up here. Way too heavy. This thing is so heavy we have to use tripods to put it up into position.
Is this the fall?
So it's time to work on this door. We're not as far along as I really wanted to be before we started to cut the door opening out, but jumping up and down to get inside of the cabin is getting very tiring. So we're gonna go ahead and start prepping, at least to cut an opening so that we can start to get in and out, make it a little bit easier. We still have to climb up to work on that roof, but getting inside is getting to be a real pain. The weather is starting to change here. It's starting to get cold, and thank goodness we just put up the last purlin, this peak purlin. So satisfying. And as the walls were great to get finished, but as soon as we started bringing that roof in, made all the difference. It's really starting to come together. It totally looks like a cabin. I'm so excited by how it's starting to look. And now we got to get some cover on these purlins. We'll start putting the roofing material on. Then it's going to feel like a cabin. I'm really excited too about the way these gable ends came together. Everything is extremely stable up here, so I'm really happy with the way these gable ends turned out. It's almost time to start working on putting the roofing material on. We're just doing a little bit of last prep work on the purlins to kind of flatten them out a little bit. In Nolan's memoirs about growing up in the Midwest in the early 19th century, he talks about living in a bark-covered house. And here is a piece of tulip bark, and this bark is off of some of these trees. Some of these trees were cut down and more than a year and a half ago, and I took the bark off. And if you cut these trees down in the spring, you can remove the bark all in one big giant sheet. And so we've got a bunch of this bark that we harvested almost 18 months ago. Nolan complained, he talked about his mother complaining about this bark. Instead of nailing it down, which maybe they didn't have nails, but they just weighted it down with weight logs. So they would take logs and put it on top of the roof in a kind of a ladder structure to help hold all the roofing material down. We might do a little bit of that. We also have a couple of other things to try out. These are black locust thorns. And you would think a thorn off of a tree, and some of these thorns can get 3 or 4 inches long. These thorns are extremely hard and extremely sharp. And if we're going into a green tulip log, you can pound these in just like a nail. And we also have some nails. We don't want to use a lot of these nails. Nails back then were very expensive, so we'll be very judicious with our nail use. Probably put some weight logs on too to help hold this bark down. This is going to be quite an experiment.
It'll do it. Yeah, I bet you have. How's that going?
The roof is on. It's amazing. The roofing material we use for this, the tulip bark, I harvested that over probably a 2-month period, more than a year ago. It took a tremendous quantity of time. Yesterday, we had all the purlins done and we said, let's start putting the bark on. The purlins probably took us, 3 days to get ready. The bark, it went up like that. All that work that we'd done previously just went right together, and the roof is on it. It just needs some tiny little bit of touch-up work. So we've gotten over the 2 of the biggest hurdles. Got the walls up, and those were heavy and big and took a lot of time. And we got this whole roof structure, which is a little more complex. And boy, that's really made a ton of difference to this. We could start living it if we had to right now. So I'm excited about what we've done and how much work it's been. But what's coming up next is the chimney. And that's going to have some real challenges in it and some engineering. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to go together, but I'm just so excited to get started on that. As you can see here, we've got the walls up. The roof is on, at least to get started with. The front door has been cut out and the jambs are in place. We're gonna stop with the door there. I think that's good enough for now because we've got to keep moving. It's time to take a look at what we're gonna do with the fireplace. We've already cut the opening here. We've cut down halfway on this this bottom log, this sill log. I didn't want to cut it all the way. I wanted to have a little bit more structure. So the very bottom is still connected. And this is wide enough for the clay interior. Let me read to you from George Washington's directions about building soldier huts at Valley Forge, 1777. Fireplace directions. The fireplace is made with wood and secured with clay on the inside, 18 inches thick. This fireplace is to be in the rear of the hut. We're going to be building the walls of the fireplace, or the outer structure, almost exactly the same way that we've made the walls of the cabin. But inside of that is a clay lining, or at least he calls it a clay lining. This is probably more like a cob lining that has clay and sand mixed together so it doesn't shrink down. This is going to take a lot of work to get this done. It's not going to be just terribly complicated, but it's going to take some time. The problem is the weather is not cooperating. It's getting colder and colder. It's going to be winter very soon, and we've got to have this made. This clay can't freeze. We've got to get it dry while it's still warm enough, so we've got to hurry. While they're working on the log portion of the chimney and fireplace, I'm going to be working on the clay section, or in this case, we're making cob. Not strictly clay, because we want it to work better than clay all by itself, which will dry and then shrink, crack, and fall down. So we've got the components for cob here. I've got a pit that I'm going to be making it in. The pit's full of water. We've got clay. The local soil here is very dense clay. It's perfect for cob. I've also got some sand that'll help keep it from shrinking, and the binders in there that keep the long form structure complete. We've got some cut grasses here, or straw, and then I've got some horse manure for short fiber work. Now I've just got to stomp this all into place. As you can see, the chimney's coming along pretty well. This chimney is basically a mini log cabin. As we build this up, we're filling the interior of this little mini log cabin with our cob, or our clay interior. This has to be really nice and thick to protect the logs from catching on fire. So originally George Washington called for something like 18-inch thick. I'm not sure what he really intended there. 18 inches is way too thick. I set this up for walls as thick as say a foot thick. That's even still too thick, so our fireplace is going to be a little bigger than I expected. I'm okay with that. So as we go up the walls, this clay wants to sag down inside, so we have to slowly put little fires in it to get it to harden up so it can support the wall above it. This is tricky. It's very difficult to do, and it takes time, and we don't have time. We are running out of time as we go on this project. Winter is fast approaching. It is already, it gets down to freezing almost every night now. So we've got to speed this process up. So while I'm working on the chimney, we're also going ahead and we're chinking and daubing the outside of the cabin that we can get to. So we got multiple teams working here. Some people working on the chimney, some people working on the exterior and even the interior a little bit on this cabin. So it's really starting to come together pretty quickly, and it turns out that the daubing goes a lot faster than I thought it was going to. So that's good. It's offsetting the slow chimney work with the fast daubing work. Maybe we'll get it done in time. It's a press. We got to really press.
Ready? Yep. Okay. What?
correctly. Right. Like, these